Thanks for joining us. This is the agent versus promoter panel. My name is Amanda Gregoire. I have been in the industry for 15 years now, doing marketing for concerts and events. I have my own company called All Good Promotion. I am based out of Edmonton, but I do work across the country from coast to coast. I'm also the chapter lead for Women in Music Canada. We have a mixer tomorrow at 10 a.m. Everyone's welcome. But today's conversation should be interesting. I don't know if you follow the agent versus promoter Instagram account, but it's got some good industry memes. It's pretty really funny. Good. Yeah, it's really funny. Definitely worth checking out. But on our panel today, we have Matt Sandrin with Peachy and Jonathan Nudell with Good Shows. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about what you do in the industry, how you got your start, and maybe where you're based.
Cool. I'm Matt Sandrin. I'm from Toronto. I've lived there all my life. I'm a booking agent. I'm a part of a US-based booking agency called Peachy. There's only a few agents. Between the 3 agents and the 2 admin assistants, we have about 55 to 60 clients. I have about 18 or 19 bands that I do North American booking for, but primarily in the States. And right now, for whatever reason, all my clients are American. I started putting on shows in Toronto about 10 years ago, and I did that, I think over 3 or 4 years, I put on 300 local shows or something like that. And I just eventually transitioned into being a booking agent, and it's been a journey, and I'm here in Calgary talking to people about it, so that's cool.
Cool.
Hi, I'm John. I organize concerts in Montreal under the name Good Shows. I've been organizing concerts for 10 years. It started to get a little more serious in the last few years. Gained a lot of momentum after the pandemic. There was a big need, you can say, for shows, a big demand, and I kind of did it because I loved it, and I think there was like tons of people who motivated me and kept me motivated to grow, and I had a vision of certain artists that I wanted to bring to Montreal and try to bring new, different styles of music. I've worked with Matt on a few shows. We've known each other for a while. I knew Matt before he was an agent.
I knew John before I was an agent.
Yeah. And I've worked on, festival curation for different companies. Worked with festivals in Montreal. And I try to do a couple of shows in Montreal a month, from big artists to completely unknown artists, and try to integrate them as best as I can in the city.
Cool, thanks. So maybe I'll just start the conversation off with just like a very basic explanation of what an agent is and what a promoter is, because I'm not sure, maybe there are people in the room who aren't familiar, but an agent traditionally represents the artist and works towards getting them shows, like bookings. So whether it's on a festival or independently through a venue or working with a promoter, that's more so their agent's role. And then the promoter works on the other side in seeking artists to book for festivals, for venues. So those are kind of the two different roles. But what would you say the key difference in responsibility between agents and promoters are when planning and executing a tour?
Well, an agent is essentially selling the tour to a promoter, and the promoter is buying it. Mm-hmm. Simply put, I think that's the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He basically explained it. The promoter has more of the local responsibilities, pairing them up with the right people if there are local support slots, putting them in the right venues, having the show be promoted in the right circles, priced correctly. Certain financial things are obviously negotiated with the agent. But the agent kind of tries to find the right promoters for their artists, depending on the deals, depending on what types of shows the promoter is doing. So there's a lot of factors. But yeah, that's it.
Would you say traditionally it's more so agents reaching out to promoters or promoters reaching out to agents?
It depends. I mean, when I'm setting up a tour, I'm hitting up promoters, but maybe if I'm not setting up a tour and John sees that I'm repping a band that he wants to bring to Montreal, he might drop me a line and say, hey, like, when can we get this band over here?
Exactly, yeah.
Nice. Are there specific qualities or like situations where miscommunication happens, like potential for conflict,
Yes.
or do you maybe want to expand on that a bit?
CAD, USD.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, maybe explain some of that. Like, I know that's.
I think a lot of Americans don't realize that $20 Canadian is like $14. And they kind of realized that after the first mistake. But I remember after COVID, people were like, not, and there's also the way people get paid. Let's say I'm giving someone cash, they're transferring that cash. Let's say they get back into the States, they go to the border is now taking a cut. So then they learn, next time, just wire me exactly $500 instead of like 15% going to the government or whatever. So there's like a lot of, I guess that's a bit of a miscommunication, but there's, what else? What else can?
Well, it's just, I mean, that's a big reason why agents use contracts to eliminate those miscommunications, just so that, everything is agreed in on paper, and we use that as a reference.
Yeah.
When I was starting out and not using contracts, I suffered from a lot of mistakes, more than I do these days. So
Yeah, contracts are very important in any deal.
tedious, but
Yeah,
it's securing for sure.
Yeah, for sure. What are the key responsibilities between agents and promoters when planning a tour? Like maybe just go through some of the conversations of negotiation and okay, so you've reached out and had the initial, hey, we want to have this band. Where does it kind of go from there?
Would you mind rephrasing that?
So you've had the initial conversation. You're saying, I want to bring my artist to Montreal. Talk about next steps in the conversation of negotiation.
So in pertaining to the individual show or the individual show as a part of a tour? Because those are two.
Yeah, maybe touch on both because they're both pretty relevant.
Well, I mean, the way I go about setting up a tour is I will come up with a route, then I'll send that route to the management or the band, whoever to approve. Once I have the route approved, I will start making a list of maybe one or two venues or promoters for each city. And then I reach out to those places and I get venue avails and holds. And then usually the next step, I get an offer. I compile those offers and I bring it to the band. And then we go through and see if we need anything amended, or do we have enough guarantees where, we can feel confident that they're at least going to be not in the red.
Cool. So breaking down some of that industry lingo, a route, meaning kind of where artists would go on a tour, guarantee meaning
the amount of money they're promised,
Yeah.
the promoter promised to pay.
Yeah. Which is something that maybe as a promoter you want to speak on, because maybe people don't necessarily understand too that as a promoter you're taking the risk for the show, right?
Depends on the deal. There
Yeah.
could be a
Depends on the
door
show,
deal
yeah.
where there's it's based on a percentage.
And sometimes the artist can make more money from that percentage deal too.
Right. Or it's like, I'm guaranteeing you $500 minimum, but then if we sell X, you get, it switches into the percentage. Or there's like the classic like 80-20 split or 85-15 split where it's like you have your guarantee of all of your expenses and then there's overages that are split between the promoter and the headliner or the package or whatever.
Yeah, after the taxes, fees, expenses, and promoter profit are covered.
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah.
How do promoters and agents like typically first connect or build working relationships? Like, how did maybe you two get connected, or how do you traditionally find like local promoters to work with if you were in a market that you haven't been?
I think for me, when I was, booking my first tours, I would just look at similar bands that had recently toured to the band that I was booking a tour for, and I would look at what promoters and venues they were working with. Because, if I'm comparing this band to my band, then that band did seemingly decent at that show, it's probably an okay spot for my band. But then it's also just like, I've been, I met you as a promoter, and when you're just at shows and doing stuff, you just meet people, and a lot of it's just organic, and you don't really even know how it happens.
Yeah, it's a pretty small industry. There's really like a handful of like local promoters now that aren't Live Nation, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're following bands online, people post their posters, oh, I'm playing here, and then you'll see the information of, the bands that they're playing with in Montreal and the promoters that they work with, and that will kind of expand your knowledge in that city. There's a lot of promoters that I didn't know existed, and then you'd see a flyer and you're like, oh, what's this all about? And you kind of like go, like there's like a bit of a deep dive. And the closer the markets are, the more I kind of know about them. Like Toronto, I know a fair bit about. New York, Philadelphia, but like outside that, I can't tell you anything about like Indianapolis or like, anywhere. Okay.
So I guess that stems to a good question as next one as well is, what do you think the value or importance is of working with a local promoter when you're trying to like route or book a tour? Like, I think more so lately with like the overtaking of some like independent promoters, there are a lot of like mega promoters that don't work with local like groups anymore. Like, what do you think some of the importance is of working with local promoters?
A local promoter can help engage a community in the way that a Live Nation promoter most likely can't.
100%.
And like when I have a smaller band that I'm starting to put out, and I'm not sure if they're even worth tickets, I'm still gonna, bring them to John and see like, can we just see how it is, and we go from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that Matt's right about the fact that local promoters kind of engage a community in a more essential way in certain circumstances.
Like for example, there's a good handful of my bands that I know that will perform better with John than other specific promoters in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And
So you've noticed that like trend of like when you have that local promoter like working with you, like sales are better.
depends on the band. It depends on the act, for sure.
Yeah, it's a healthy balance of like knowing who to pair the out-of-towners with, and how to, what the poster's going to look like and where the show is going to be and how you're going to price it, and maybe you want to make it a tiny bit cheaper to make it a little bit more enticing. But I'll give you an example, like Evenco in Montreal books like the Bell Center, so like 20,000 cap shows, right? But they've also gotten emails to do smaller acts, and I'm sure they're interested in developing, relationships and whatnot. But I've seen shows that they've done where it's like a small venue, and the extent of the marketing is essentially a sponsored ad, and they don't really have like a key in the community as far as like what locals to put them with or like whatever. So if you put that show with a local promoter, there's going to be more. They have more intellect on how to kind of maneuver,
And a farther reach.
and a farther reach in some circumstances. Well, you'd think like Evenco, like you see them on Facebook, like 40,000 Facebook followers or whatever. At the end of the day, those numbers don't really matter if you like you want the right people who are looking they're not looking in that direction for those types of shows, So, yeah.
So what do you think about like co-promoting with some of those bigger promoters? Do they reach out and like ask for your assistance on some of the like getting into the communities that they can't reach and
and they'll offer you like $100 and
and they're like do all the work
thanks,
and
or they'll give you nothing or whatever. But no, I haven't worked with them. I've worked with like other bigger promotions that like sometimes I'm down. Like there's a band that I really love, but they're way too big and the guaree's too high. But like I'm down to promote it because I love them. I'll offer like a really good deal on like a marketing deal to like promote it, and it'll be like a co-promotion. But that's all right sometimes. It's like a win-win for both parties maybe.
Yeah.
As some of my bands start to grow, I've been, when I can, trying to keep the original promoters who booked my band the first time, try and bring them on as a co-promoter with Live Nation or whoever, and ideally it's the big corporate company who's going to bankroll it, and you can still have the person who was there at the beginning still a part of it, and.
But that's because Matt's a good guy.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to do that.
I was going to say there used to definitely be a lot more history, and it was called like having history with an artist where like I worked for a company called Union Events, and they were one of the biggest promoters in Canada. And for years, like you would build something called history with an artist. So the next time they came through that market, you would have the first shot to put in an offer to work with that artist. And then slowly, I think the pandemic really kind of shifted all of that too. Like independent promoters obviously took a big hit during the pandemic and weren't able to, compete with some of the larger offers that the bigger promoters are making when they came back because they didn't have the cash funds. So it's interesting. A lot of that like old school history stuff is kind of seemingly not as important as it used to be, and now it's just who has the biggest offer.
Yeah, although like any promoter will still like use history to cry and complain. Like every promoter will still do that.
Yeah. I mean, fairly if they've put in the like
they've
put in the legwork
to
like build up an artist and make make them known in the market, they should have first right to kind of get that show too, potentially. Shifting now, like from an artist perspective, so if an artist is looking to maybe book a tour in Eastern Canada, maybe they're not represented, is it better to reach out directly to a promoter, or is it better to try and like seek an agent first?
I would recommend going through a promoter.
Like at certain levels, or like
like if I'm recommending to an artist, I'd recommend an artist to go directly to a promoter rather than worry about finding a booking agent. Don't worry about finding a booking agent. When you're ready, a booking agent will find you. Like that's straight up is what it is. I get so many submissions all the time. I hate saying no to people, but it's just like every band that hits me up at least like once a day, like I'll check out your music. It's probably good, but I think there's a reason that you're not on my radar yet,
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how do you find bands?
The grind.
The grind,
Yeah.
Spotify algorithms.
Okay.
It's a lot of, I work primarily in
mouth.
indie rock and shoegaze and hardcore, and it's pretty cohesive. So a lot of those bands know each other.
Okay.
And it's like a lot of word of mouth and just kind of, having a reputation, and sometimes yeah, like sometimes bands will hit me up, but the only times I've signed those bands that have hit me up is those bands have already been on my list. Like,
Interesting.
you know?
So from a promoter perspective, like having artists reach out and be like, hey, I really want to book a tour, or like, is it better for artists to try to get on as an opener for a slot, or what's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends what's available the days they need. I get, like Matt said, I get emails too, like almost every day, and a lot of them are people who, you know, they're probably really nice, and they, you know, I've been there too. Like we've been there, and there are promoters in the city that are kind of more open to just like, hey, if you need a show, like hop on, and like that kind of stuff is really good for a community. Like there's a venue in London called Shackwell Arms. They do free shows, and they kind of like always have people go, and there could be bands that no one's heard of, but people go because they know they're going to see something cool. And there's certain opportunities like that. I think a really good idea for like a band with no representation would be to kind of contact other bands in those cities and see if those bands want to work with them. And then those bands already have a relationship with a promoter or multiple promoters, and it's an easier sell to the promoter. Because if you're an unknown artist, you're essentially like, I'm doing all the work for you, right? And like, I don't have the heart to be like, you need to give me this much money before I pay you. Like, I'm gonna try to make you money, and then I'm gonna get paid. But in reality, I'm like an Airbnb superhost, you know? Like, you're sleeping at my house, and then you're asking me what food do I get, you know, where do I stay, what cool place, you know, and I'm like doing all this stuff, and then I'm like, see you later, and I make no money.
Host bands at your
and I
house too.
host bands at my house. So I just feel like it's kind of tough. Like the older I'm not like 20 years in the game, but I'd say like in my early 20s, I had an easier time being more motivated, being like, yeah, this is exciting. I'm bringing these people from wherever here, and we're gonna have fun, and they're gonna meet this band they're gonna play with, and maybe they'll have a tour together or something, and that'll be cool. But yeah, I think the most successful way is to kind of find local artists that you can play with, and then they're gonna kind of convince the promoter, or you're really, really sick too. Like there's, you know, one, I would say, it doesn't happen a lot, but like there's this band PAX. They didn't have a representation. They hit me up, Instagram message. I listened to them. I saw a video. I was like, holy shit, this band's so sick. And I put on a show for them. It was an album release, and there were like 200 people. And like, that's never gonna happen. Like that's so rare for like a band with no representation to have. And yeah, it's like you're putting on all the work for them. But anyways, everybody's grateful. Everybody wants to help each other. But yeah, in theory, it's like I'm doing such a service for you. I just don't have the heart at this juncture to kind of be like, my base fee is $300. Show made $500. Here's $60 each. I just took $300. Haha. You know, which I in theory, like,
which is what a lot of venues do.
Yeah, and then a lot of those people will be like, hey, you know, like I only got paid $60. They, you know, but anyways, it's like a whole thing.
I would just, you know, I recommend. I think that it's so valuable for bands to book their own tours, and just like the most important thing about touring, especially as a band starting out, it's just meeting people and being nice, and just finding out about new bands, and like some relationships that you make on tour, they could either be valuable friendships or crucial to your career, or both, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's lots to be said to that, and it seems obvious, but like being nice and professional when you're in a space like a venue, it can't be said enough how overworked and like venues don't have bandwidth to deal with a lot of extra stuff. So like when you're talking to a venue manager or whoever, like just make sure you're being mindful of like keeping your space clean and like not being like, if you know, like be kind. And I think that goes a long way. Like it seems obvious, but it's not always. And I think, you know, they'll remember you if you were like great to work with, and then the next time they're looking for someone, they'll be sure to like reach out versus somebody who maybe comes in and smashes out a window or something, which honestly happens way more than you would ever think.
Who smashed the window?
Oh, I can't say.
Is the show that bad?
No. You had a question? Yeah, you can go ahead.
As you were talking about, like, you know, maybe moving on to that next level promoter, do you feel pressure from certain people to work with them versus those?
Primarily management, yeah. And a big reason for going with the big promoters a lot of the time is festivals. Because a lot of the festivals, you know, Live Nation and Golden Voice, specifically in the States, you know, Coachella, all that stuff. That's what all the artists want, and you kind of have to play those big rooms.
Because it's leveraged.
Yeah. Yeah, the more tickets you sell as a headliner, the more opportunities, the more money you're going to get. And unfortunately, like a lot of the smaller promoters don't have the capability on their own to, you know, go to that next step.
What does that look like? Like, let's say you have an artist that wants to be performing in Montreal, and their goal is to play Osheaga because that's what everybody seems to want. But you also have a relationship here, and like you know that maybe Evenco isn't going to bat an eye at this client for another 3 years. So you want to get started, but you know that their goal is to do that. Like, how do you approach?
I got to get in with Evenco then.
Then you just don't start the relationship here.
No, I mean, like I said, I try to make it work for everyone. But if my instructions are we are going for Osheaga, then it's like we have then I have to nurture that relationship with Evenco for that client.
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
I have a question. You guys are both booking agents, right?
Promoter.
Promoter, and then you're booking.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so for, this is a common thing, but for festival pricing, like contacting agents about asking them for bands, and you usually get, I'd say about 3 to 5 times the guarantee that they would typically get, not even, like for routing and stuff. What is, like when the promoter for the festival would get quoted very high?
Yeah.
And what is the mentality of that? It's like, to me, it's just like a used car salesman, kind of like, let's see, wool over your eyes type move. And it's very transparent because anyone that knows anything, that knows people in other markets will know what the band gets paid. With that concept, like, it's very common for most agencies. Is it like, do you find that approach is beneficial for the artists? Or like, it's just, you just want to get paid, the festival is the big payout kind of thing? Or like, what is the approach on that? Like, maybe not from you, but just from amongst the industry, I guess.
Like approach as in like, am I trying to get as much money as possible?
Yeah,
or
it's coming in really high. It kind of sometimes seems like almost like counterproductive, which is the end of conversation, right? Just like you have lots of people hitting you up.
So I mean, I have learned, from the past, like it is possible to overquote and leave a bad taste in someone's mouth, but at the same time, usually like what I'm quoting, it's like if I'm reached out to by a promoter for a festival, I'm gonna quote the average of whatever my artist is getting from the other festival plays that year, and also considering like how far is it? Are they gonna have to fly out and take time off of work, all that stuff. But at the same time, I do think that the play can be a lot more valuable than the money itself, too.
Yeah, because I'd say like from the festival standpoint, like that's pretty much like the majority of the people do that, especially the big agencies. And there's no real nuance or conversation. It's basically just shut you down.
I wish promoters could or buyers would just give me offers rather than asking me for a quote, you know?
Well, I think, yeah, well, they always want that. It's like, it's a whole move, who makes it first.
Of course.
It's like, it's definitely like, whatever. But I think, I just always wonder that because to me, and I guess in the second part of this, is it completely bad to, like I've had some other promoters say, can you at least take this offer to them? Like they say, this is with the budget, like realistically, we can only do this. Otherwise, we're gonna lose thousands and thousands of dollars. Can you take this offer to the artist if the festival?
I'll generally take every offer.
Yeah, so it's not an insult to say that?
No.
Okay, so just be like, you know what, this is all we got. It's like a lot of the time I know where it'll be like, oh, this is what, they'll just be like, yeah, they're not gonna go for that. Had that before, that's not gonna work before, right off the hop, which is like, could make sense.
But for me, I want to show that I'm bringing my clients as many opportunities as possible, and it doesn't even matter the price tag on it, right? So it's like I'd rather, even if it's an offer that I don't think is appropriate, I'd still be like, hey, like we got interest from this cool thing. What do we think about it? Like, my artist, what do we need to make this work?
Okay, that's good information. Yeah, I know someone also said that they would contact the band, which I've heard, it's like you can get blacklisted by agencies, but like not contact the band on the level of like offering them and saying, hey, we're interested in you. We want to talk to your agent. This is the dates of our festival. We're gonna give us the contact of your agent. Then they contact the agent, but they CC the artist.
Oh, I mean, some agents will get so mad about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I just roll my eyes and I'll just, respond usually with the artist not on CC anymore.
Take them off.
Yeah, because it's like,
It's weird. It's awkward.
it is awkward.
Yeah. I was like, whoa. I was like, power move. I'm like, I've definitely never done that. So it's interesting. Okay, good to know.
Yeah, I mean,
Good
there's
question.
a lot of like nuanced approaches of like what's unspoken, like etiquette.
Yeah.
Like of like the way things should be done in the concert promotion world, and it's an interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, there's definitely like chains of conversations, and then like best practices.
People gotta be more chill on it too.
Matt's so nice though.
Yeah, and
He's like, he'll call me. He
don't
called
like
me like
assholes.
after, like he gave like this band that he was booking on a tour to another promoter, and he calls me. He's like, "Hey John, I just want to let you know, it's going to this other promoter. Just wanted to tell you before you saw it." And I'm like, "This is so sweet." It's like you didn't need to do that.
Is that
but that's
not
so cool.
standard? Like normally you just find out when you see the show announcement.
Yeah.
Like you're
but
like,
it's
I
like
guess
it wasn't a band I'd worked with before kind of thing. It's just that me and Matt have like a good relationship.
Well, no,
and it was like a band that was like
They
supposed to
opened.
play on a tour.
Oh, yeah.
They were like direct support, and then they canceled because they couldn't make it to Canada. So anyways, I thought that was so sweet, and like no one, like I would get an email, but like I guess because we have more of a friend rapport than.
Also, I was doing all my shows with you, and there's another promoter that I was kind of leaving high and dry that I had to balance it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll follow that up with like, how do you deal with those, maybe that's a deal where you've kind of left a promoter high and dry, and then 6 months later you have to have another conversation with the same promoter. Like, how do you maintain those relationships when maybe you're having difficult conversations or deals that kind of didn't go the way that you want them? Is it kind of just like brush it off, or is that like there's like a balance between like, hey, this didn't work out for this specific thing, but here's something else that we can make work for you? Like,
I think it's kind of like a blank slate after, it's like 6 months, so much time has gone by. You have a new show package, completely different bands, new deal, start fresh, like forget about what happened.
They usually tend to balance out over time. And like, if I do feel like I'm leaving a promoter high and dry, and want to keep working with them and I value them, then I'm going to reach out to them.
That's good.
Because it's going to make me feel like shit if I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things you're talking about is in terms of those door deals versus like a guarantee, and quite often a lot of money is left on the table by taking a guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you have somebody that you are very familiar with, that you trust, why not push that person a softer, get it done with a door deal and carry on and allow that promoter to grow along with you and maybe make a few more dollars and move up the ladder with a higher promotion. I know the guarantee is what a band wants to see primarily. You're leaving money on the table.
Not always. It depends on the band, right? And it depends on the tour. There's some shows that or tours that I'm booking where I'm like, I really don't know how this is gonna go. Like, I'm booking the tour at the lowest scale possible, 100, 150 cap rooms, sometimes DIY stuff. Yeah.
Most promoters will take guarantees with overages. I don't think an agent's come to me with like, hey, we need a guarantee, and it's like a flat rate. It would be like a versus with overages. So, yeah. I think that making the guarantee a little bit, I think if you look at a 100 cap show, you want to if you want to be nice to, let's say, the promoter, and you don't know how the show's going to go, and you need a guarantee, maybe your break even is going to be at like 25% or 30%, right? But if you just want the money and you don't care about the relationship, you're going to want your break. The agent's going to ask for your break even to be at like 60%, 70%. And a lot of the times it's like flipping a coin. Like, who knows how many people are going to come to this? It could be booked on a Wednesday. You ask for holds all week. The Friday, Saturdays are going to do way better. But you can come back to me 3 weeks later and be like, hey, we need the show to be on a Monday. And it just fucks everything up for me. So
it also depends on just where the band is at too. Like, maybe they're financially in a comfortable place and they're like, fuck it, we don't mind rolling the dice. Because that's what a door deal really is, right? Mm-hmm. You're it's a calculated risk. You're making a bet.
Mm-hmm. Kind of. That's basically what promoting is, betting on horses and hoping it works. Mm-hmm. I want to shift gears real quick because I know we're running a bit out of time, but and I want to leave time for questions at the end if anyone has them. But back when I started, the promoter was highly held responsible for majority of the marketing when it came to promoting a show. And I feel like, in the last 5 years or a little longer, there's definitely been some blending of who's responsible for marketing what now. So do you maybe want to just touch a bit on how things have shifted in the digital age of who's responsible for marketing in a specific tour or a specific show, or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm usually fairly hands-off with the marketing. I leave that to the artist/management and the promoters, mostly just because it takes away time from booking. And it's just I know how to book. I don't, marketing isn't my bag, so.
Yep.
I generally, it depends. Sometimes the promoter will want to set up an ad. Sometimes, it's all kind of different.
Yeah, from the festival level or some of that arena stuff. I know as a marketer, we're by and large seeking access to artists' pages. We're doing marketing from the artist's side, not just from the promoter side, because a lot of the times the promoter doesn't have the same fan base. We want to
use
the
dark ads.
Yeah, we want to use the artist lookalike. So I think it's much more different than back in the day of handing out flyers hand to hand. But
which I think should also That should come back a little bit.
I agree too. I'm analog. Like I still do posters in certain markets. Like
Hand flyers at shows too, I think.
Yeah. If you like slap a QR code on there and people can just like scan it and get direct to the ticket link, like there's still something to be said. Because I'll tell you now, like from Meta's standpoint, even in the last like it's constantly changing, but in the last few like 6 months, like it's so much harder to get your ad service because it's so saturated now. Like they're teaching everyone how to do digital marketing. So like anyone who's selling anything will just book ads and like your stuff's just getting washed. So you really have to be creative in like how you're promoting a show and how you're like getting your message out there and doing stuff like handing someone a handbill. They're actually like jarred a bit because it's like something physical for them versus just being bombarded with ads. So don't forget about those old school methods for sure. Like when I started, we used to book like half-page ad in See and View, which was a local magazine in Edmonton, and it was like our weekly thing was just putting together this like physical ad, and all that's gone now. But I think there's something to be said about still doing some of that. But yeah, what's your perspective like from the promoter side of like having the artists get involved with the marketing?
I think for shows, there's like a formula, like a loose formula, where it's like you have your announce, you make sure the other groups have all the assets to promote it themselves as well. You try to get the venue maybe involved if the venue's like a strong, there's a strong rotation of the same groups. You could reach out to local blogs that could do some preview stuff. A lot of people will reach out and be like, hey, can I like get guest lists and like review this show? And that's cool. But I feel like as a promoter, I'm like, the show's already over.
Yeah.
Like I need it promoted before.
Totally.
And then I'm like, you can do this review, I'll give you this stuff, but can you give me like a little
Talk about
bump
it before
so people know, so they can come. You know, it's not like it's like a movie. You can keep seeing the movie. You know, it's like the show's over.
Yeah, I push back with radio too. They're like adding all this value for them being on site. I'm like, that's value to you, dog. Like you're showing up at my stuff. Like, how are you like talking about the show in advance to sell tickets? So.
I think a lot of like the corporate level, like I guess dark ads are used a lot, where they like. You can use Facebook to kind of like be approved to get into the artist's Instagram and like post through their Instagram, and it targets like people in your city. So that's kind of useful too.
Still confusing to me.
It's confusing, yeah. It's like kind of complicated.
But it's where like the tie-in, because like I'm constantly reaching out to agents being like, we need ad access. It's kind of like standard now. Like they usually are pretty like the bigger agencies are just like, here's the ad access.
If that happens, then usually I'll loop in someone from the team, from my artist team.
Yeah.
I think the best promotion for a show is to have it curated super well.
Yeah.
Like you have the right bands playing and you make the poster look super sick, and then the organic growth is going to take it, you know?
Yeah.
Like you can spend all the money in the world on like boosting a post. I've had shows where like I've spent $0 on ads and it sells out. And I've had shows where like it doesn't matter how much money you can throw at it, it's not going to move, you know? So a lot of the times it's like, there's a lot of factors like day of the week and pricing,
100%.
et cetera.
Other events happening, there's a lot. But to tie all that into, like when you're working with a local promoter, they have usually stronger relationships with those like local media, local blogs, like because like I'm talking to them every day. Whereas you know some of the bigger companies that we won't name, but they don't have those relationships because they have such high turnover with staff, and they don't build that same rapport with some of the media or whoever, just because they're like, you know, they don't even have a local office. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I feel like now promoting a show is like you're like kind of dealing with a meta. Like you make the post, you do everything you can, and then like Meta's there, and they're like, so you want people to see your show?
Yeah. Mark Zuckerberg's just
and
like.
then it's like a guy like with a cloak, and they're like, so, well now you have to pay this, and like Apple's gonna take a 15% fee on this, and oh, you paused the ad, well Apple's still taking their fee, and how you know, and it's like a whole thing. You're kind of wrestling with that, and that's why organic growth is the best, but organic growth is also kind of difficult.
Well, and we're hard in Canada because we have the block with the castle, like on Meta and
Right,
Google, like
yeah.
we can't see organic or news articles. So even if you're actually having some of those like blogs or newspapers talk about your show, like it's not even being seen. But yeah, Arlo, go ahead.
Dark ads. I've never heard that from before.
Okay, so yeah, I'll explain. It's so as a promoter, we can actually go in and get advertiser access from your page. So I can reach your audience. I can post like coming from you. You can approve. Like I usually like if I'm creating copy, I'll send it back to the management team and be like, hey, like this is what we want to say it, but it would be coming from your page. So I'd be advertising as you. And so it would come to your audience. Like it's not from my page. It's called dark ads. Yeah, it's
a nice way to balance because then you like if you have aesthetic on your socials and you're like I don't want a promoter flyer on my timeline because it looks gross compared to everything else
Yeah.
that I'm doing. Like I've got a vision and whatever.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to be able to still like give that access, share, use your channel that you've built up, because obviously that's where your audience is, but
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
not have it be like front and center and live there forever, or you have to archive it.
Well, and because by and large, like the average ticket buyer doesn't necessarily care who the promoter is. Like they care about the artist. They want to know like said artist is coming. They don't really care that it's like blank promoter or whoever, unless like that promoter maybe has like a, you know, like obviously like I assume you have pretty niche audiences that follow you who are like, what's good, what's coming up in Montreal, like whereas some other promoters are like kind of they don't have that same like
It's
culture.
definitely a value
Yeah.
for what John offers. You know, I was speaking earlier, I was going to John and not other promoters because he has that niche reach that the other promoters don't because they're just
They're like blanket. They're doing all
Yes,
shows.
yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
like if someone's like,
And
what's
no
up on
love on
Friday?
any of them.
Yeah, like what's up on Friday night, and they know
Yeah.
like that's going to be a cool event, then they'll reach out to you.
Your page kind of has like your own audience who's like dipping into all these different things. But then when you do like a dark ad, it's like more focused. So like everybody in Montreal, let's say the artist has 10,000 followers and 1,000 of them are from Montreal and you sponsor this thing and you target Montreal. I would say a good portion of that 1,000 people are going to see the ad. But if I post it and I sponsor it and I, put all the keywords and whatever, how many of those 1,000 people are going to see? And I think those 1,000 people are very key. The people who actually follow the artist to get them to come, and then you have your own pool of people. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we're just about out of time, so I wanted to make sure we throw it out to the audience. And if you had any questions, comments, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, this is a question for Matt. You talked about this a little bit earlier, but I was kind of curious about what sort of level, from your perspective, it makes sense for a band to work with an agent versus booking their own tours.
I was worried when I said that how like discouraging that because it's not meant to be discouraging. I think that a band should be able to do a fairly big, in my case, North American tour and have history or ticket value as a headliner of at least 50 to 100 tickets. Just being able to be confident as an artist, like I know that people know us. I know worst case, we don't have any locals. Worst case, there will still be 50 people there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you just like have to know that like there is an audience.
Yeah. And to be fair, like that is like building your own brand. Like you have to appreciate that like everyone is in the business of like making money. So it's to be expected that you have some sort of following, because if it's zero, then everyone's taking the risk on like having the expenses, having all of the like extra, time sunk into. So it's owning your own like identity and being like, I'm worth this, and this is like how it's presented.
Yeah, because I when I'm working with a band, I want to be able to sell it rather than ask for a favor.
Yeah.
And I'm able to sell it if, for whatever reason, it's just apparent that there's a value, rather than me being like, hey, this is the band's first time. Can you just
Do it.
do it.
Yeah, because there's a lot of like asks for favors in this world. Like, you know, everyone's kind of like doing one for another, like in certain instances.
And I still have a couple tours that feel like that for me, that I am like, the band is maybe a little earlier, but like we're not getting any support tours. Let's just get them on the road. And I'm not sure what they're gonna, like how they're gonna do as a headliner, but just like getting them out there. I mean, one band that I just had do that, you know, they went on a 4-week tour. Instagram was like 3,800 when they left, and then, you know, came back and it was around 6.
Wow.
And it's like, they weren't playing any huge shows or anything. They just, you know, we found the right DIY gigs and, you know, planted a seed in these markets. And hopefully by the time they have new music, or, you know, a year or two from now, the band will have more organic growth, and, you know, it'll make more sense for them to tour. Sorry, that's super long-winded.
Yeah, no, I think that answers the question.
Good question, Tex.
Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious what you guys look at, but from both ends, in terms of metrics to make decisions. Like, what numbers do you trust in a world of numbers?
It's so interesting because, like, the big numbers that at least I'm referring to are the Instagram and Spotify numbers. But what's interesting is you can't trust those on their own. For me, it's not like, sure, if a band has 10,000 Instagram followers, that's cool. But what shows me that something's happening is if, like, I have a spreadsheet, an A&R spreadsheet, just to track artists that I have eyes on, and, you know, I'll put in like whatever the date is of that I'm entering the artist in. I'll put their Instagram followers and their Spotify monthly listeners, although that it doesn't matter as much, and I'll go back like a week, 2, 3 weeks later, and that growth for me is like the biggest metric, because it's like within, you know, the last few weeks, it's gone from this to this.
Yeah, it's
And
measurable.
then repeating that process a couple of times has been like a really big way of how I sign bands and how I know that it might be time. Because when I started as a booking agent too, I signed so many bands that I liked, but the
Data wasn't there.
the data, but also like the ceiling was there, and it just if I'm working with a band, I got to be confident that there's growth.
Yeah. It's business after all, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to, like, especially when you're at like the DIY level, a lot of times your emotions will get involved because you are just a fan of the music.
Still
and you're
does.
Like, yeah, you know, you're like, hey, this is like something I'm really like keen on, but maybe it doesn't necessarily translate. So, yeah.
I think for me, there's a lot of like, if I look at their Instagram, let's say I see some mutuals and like,
Also, who is following? Yeah,
exactly,
for
right?
sure.
So it's like, oh, like these friends in Montreal like love this band, or they would hype it up if I did it, or you see their pictures even, it's like, oh, this looks great, you know, like, or you know, there's tons of stuff. Like the Spotify monthly is kind of cool too, even though Matt said it doesn't have like a big translation. There could be like bands with like a million
monthly listeners,
and like
zero
no
ticket
one
sales,
comes,
yeah.
right? But like generally
Yeah.
people come. But like touching on what you were saying about the landscape online changing. Like 10 years ago, I remember Facebook events was such like a good barometer of like who's
Yeah.
gonna actually come.
Yeah.
And you'd see 100 people interacting with an event and be like, okay, like I can gauge how many. Now it's like
It's all
completely
bots.
irrelevant.
It's so many bots too. Like, there's so many fake accounts that are like selling 4 tickets, selling whatever tickets. You're like, you're not a human. Stop
Like
it.
you'll see events with like one person attending and like it sells out because
Yeah.
no one's like the crowd is not as much on Facebook too. I
Yeah.
think more people are on
Kids are
Instagram.
not on Facebook.
They're
No,
not
no, no.
on, they're
Like,
not on Facebook.
the audiences have been completely shifted
Yeah.
for sure.
So like Instagram, like the likes on a poster is a more of a barometer than an event being like, you know, but there's still crowds that will hit attending and like flood an event.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Was also just kind of wondering, you mentioned all your clients are American earlier. Is there any reason for that, like, besides coincidence, or is it, like, I know it's pretty expensive for Canadian artists to tour in the States, is that part of it?
I mean, there's a few reasons. One being, it's so much easier for a U.S. band to just get in the van and go for it. And whereas if a Canada band, you know, we have Canada, but to go into America, it's such a stupid, you know, they got us going through hoops, and there's a barrier, and I think about it so much because, you know, I'm not as involved in the Toronto scene as much, but, you know, I know so many bands and musicians from there, and for whatever reason, just I guess the bands that I'm around, I feel like it's just like I just haven't found the right ones.
Yeah.
I think it kind of comes down to that, and just the barriers to entry makes it so much harder.
Not to be discouraging either, but touring in Canada is like a completely different landscape. It's way more difficult. Like our geographical like touring routing is like really big. Like going from Vancouver to Halifax is like a big undertaking, whereas in the States you can hit so many markets in a quarter of the country, and like it's way easier to make money that way as a tour versus like driving from Vancouver to Winnipeg and like, you know, having it be -40 or whatever. There's just like, it's touring in Canada is like a completely different beast.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, it really sucks, but Canadian bands trying to develop, their growth is stunted by the restrictions of visa and the expenses and all this. And unfortunately, I've seen on many occasions, Americans aren't as excited to get behind this like no ticket artist who's like referred to a friend who's like supposedly really cool. So I think a good advice for like a Canadian band would be to like make friends with like bands in the States and like do tours with them and kind of ride off each other and help them as much as you can. But yeah, so that's kind of maybe a little bit why it's just like a smaller pool of people, you know, like the East Coast, Montreal and Toronto, you can get to these hot areas a little easier. It's just tougher. It kind of sucks. I really wish that there was like no visa restrictions, and I think that you'd see a completely different landscape and a lot more Canadian bands and maybe some friends develop in a more healthy environment.
Yeah. You had another question?
How are you guys seeing like advanced ticket sales?
Oh boy.
Not great.
It's wild. Like the trend of the last, especially coming back after the pandemic versus like I said, I've been in this industry for 15 years, and like coming back after the pandemic, everything's being sold in the last few weeks, which as a promoter is like, it makes you sweat because you're taking the risk on the show and you announce it and you see like 10 tickets sell, and then you're like, oh man, have I made a mistake? So you're trying to like hold on in the hopes that, you know, people will buy at the last few weeks. But I mean, and the message to that is like, if you're interested in shows or venues, like buy as early in advance as possible because you're supporting the promoter too. Like you're actually like, if it's an independent promoter, they're biting their nails, like waiting to see if the show's gonna be okay. Because like you're waiting, and like people like, and it's a tough economy. Like people don't have like a lot of extra money. They're paying $500 for groceries every week. Thanks, Loblaws. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just like it's tough for everybody. But like that's why like you're seeing so many shows get canceled too. It's just like you're waiting and then it's like not happening.
Yep. It's a bit of a diluted market. There's so many shows. There's so much, you know, money you could spend on going to events. the way I see it now in the last few months, it's like either everybody goes or nobody goes.
Yeah.
It's like you have a hot artist, the show's gonna sell out in advance. You have a show that's like a good show, but like the artist doesn't have like a lot of momentum behind them. It's gonna be really, you're gonna have to basically pad the show with like locals, and like everybody who's going to the show is basically there to see their friends.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's a grind.
So yeah, it's kind of tough.
It's
but
making
it
me want to
changes.
target smaller venues for artists and
Yeah.
also lower the ticket price a little bit too. Just
Yeah.
because, and also like, it really feels, and I don't know if this is factual, but I said this last year too, it feels like every year since COVID, touring is just getting so much more saturated. There's more artists,
Yeah.
there's more music than ever.
And it's more expensive. Like it's wild because it's more expensive.
All the
Like it's like
inflation.
yeah.
I think Matt has a very unique and good relationship kind of approach, but a lot of agents are obsessed with the upside. They want to see what they're going to make when the show sells out, and most of the time the show's not going to sell out. So they're looking at the wrong things. Like after COVID ended, there's all this money and all this interest being flooded, and the interest goes up. So then the prices go up, but then the interest goes down. So it's like there needs to be some sort of like more understanding, like the way Matt kind of approaches it, where it's like, hey, like we need to be kind of realistic. We can't just like think about the highest upside of the show because we're gonna get burned. And it's like, anyways, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. We're running short on time. We're a bit over. So if there's any last minute questions, we'll try and, yep.
I have one little question. There's been a movement, and mostly from the big players like Live Nation and other things, towards not having any locals on touring bills, and I hate it, and I think it's killing the local music scene. And do you know, like, why is that? And could there be a middle ground where just like start the show early or have the opening band? Like I know because like bands are on tour, they got to get on the road. They don't want to like. But like, was there a movement to remove locals on like good tours? I think that builds community connection and also builds local artists.
I think it's because they're not thinking about community.
Yeah, 100%.
Like,
100%. It's not about that.
And because, I guess to them, they're like, well, we have our show, we have our artists, they'll sell the tickets. What is a local artist going to do for us?
It's
Yeah.
to create a connection with
You're absolutely right, but
Yeah,
they're not
I think
thinking about it.
I think we all agree, right?
I
Like,
agree with you, and I try to put locals on, and I get, if I have a show with like two touring bands and there's no locals, I'm getting like a dozen messages from people like, oh, it's only two bands, why can't I play? And like, I would love to add locals. My theory, artists and like people in the music industry are like very sensitive people and like emotional people, and like vibes are like a big deal, So these
sensitive.
kids come in and they're like green and they're playing and like they make it about them instead of, and it's like this touring package, like they don't want to deal with anybody, like they just want to have
Yeah.
their show and their vibe, and they don't care like if they can sell an extra 20 tickets with this local band
Yeah.
opening. They want it to be like their vibe. That's my theory.
They
For
don't
my-
want an opening band that's gonna the singer's gonna introduce every member playing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and be like, my grandma's here.
I think that's the from my perspective too, like it's the main reasoning, again, not speaking on their behalf, but my belief is it's just like the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Like they don't want the hassle of they don't want the hassle of having to deal with the like extra backline or whatever. It's just like not like for them to sell 20 or even 4 tickets, like it's not about community, which is too bad because it does like hinder the industry in a lot of ways.
For them too, because if you play with local band, and I think it comes down to the promoter.
The artist, I would say.
The promoter needs to be responsible, get the right people, keep them in line, and like not get the like greenest band that's gonna sell the most tickets. It's annoying. That's gonna fuck up the show. You know what I mean? Which I understand that part. So I think it got ruined at some point.
Yeah.
Where the people were like, I just don't want to do this anymore. But I do think when you do that, you get this band, they'll be your biggest fans forever. They're going to promote your band. They're going to come to all your shows, and they're also you're building the profile
But
of this artist, local artist, to be the next touring band that can be, It creates a bigger.
I
And
have
I'll
signed
plug-
artists that way for sure.
Yeah, and I'll plug local promoters to give them the props. That like local promoters and venues still by and large do like give those opening slots and do like seek out the support of local bands. So I think that's just again like making that choice to like work with an independent and like have that relationship foster because it's building the community, it's building the
Depends what juncture your artist is
Yeah.
at, you know, if they're still developing, I think it's always a good idea. But if like the shows are selling out everywhere, it's mainly the artist's initiative to be like, hey, like I found this local, like we want them to come on board. I want them to like, and it's also kind of a show for them too, because like they're doing a month tour. They're seeing the same show every night. They kind of want to be a little entertained too and like meet some people too. So I think if the artist says like, I want a local, everybody's going to listen.
Yeah.
But sometimes, like a lot of the times it's like no locals. So you really have to push and anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again. It was great to speak
Thank
with both of you.
you.
You did great.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody. And